War Rapport family, we are back with another weekly edition of Building Rapport. And we got a very special guest for you guys today. The one, the only, Zach Blackerby of Locked on Auburn podcast. Zach, thanks for joining us, man.
Thank you guys for having me on. I mean, this is really, really cool. Don't do a whole lot of video. I'm not an expert like you guys are by any stretch of the imagination, but this is awesome. You guys have been absolutely killing it, and it's an honor to join y'all for a few minutes.
Well, listen, Zach, I want you to start off by telling everybody a little bit about you. You've been covering Auburn for some time now. And can you tell everybody a little bit about how you got into podcasting and how you got into podcasting about Auburn and covering Auburn football?
Yeah, I mean, I would absolutely love to. Absolutely love to. So I'm a radio guy, old school radio where it's still around, it's still kicking. But I interned at the Auburn Network my 4 years at Auburn. And I actually entered Auburn as a musical theater major. Was really into acting and theater and performing and all that. And realized, okay, I want to do the closest thing to that by still being able to have like a consistent job kind of thing. So I got into radio and changed my major to communication. And, after I got done at Auburn, the Auburn Network hired me full time. And I started kind of being, a producer, board op, sometime co-host to Bill Cameron with The Drive from 4 to 6. Every afternoon on ESPN 106.7. Eventually got my own show. It was called The Lunch Break. Launched that with Dana Salonen. She was the sports editor of the OA News several years back. She went on to do some stuff for the Detroit Free Press, brought in Painter Sharpless. He's now doing stuff with the Auburn Observer with Justin Ferguson. Noah Garner did it with me for a little bit as well. Then I moved to morning news for a little bit, but while I was doing the lunch break, SEC Country reached out. And, flashback to SEC Country back when that was a thing. It was a great website, but they wanted to have podcasters for each of the SEC schools, like minus Vanderbilt, Missouri, which is funny. There's a joke there somewhere. But then after SEC Country folded, I wanted to keep doing it on my own. So I called it the Auburn Podcast. And then after doing that a few years, Locked on Auburn reached out. They wanted me a part of the network. And that's where we are today.
So, Zach, talk to us about covering Auburn football since the head coaching hire with Bryan Harsin. How's it been like? What's been kind of some thoughts you've had from covering this team, Harsin, the coaching staff? What are some of your impressions that have been made since then?
There's been a lot more speculation, right? I mean, it's a lot more hearsay just because nobody here has that relationship with Harsin. So there's been a lot more of kind of relying on leaks, inside information. It's like there's still some of, the old guard there, but for the most part, it's just kind of been, a lot of hearsay and, players kind of speaking out against certain things. So, we heard throughout spring camp how different everything was, whether it was, culturally in regards to the workouts being ridiculously tougher or players showing up late. And both of those things kind of got mentioned at media days last week on Thursday, but I think it's just been kind of more of that. And then, I don't do a whole lot of recruiting, but just from the recruiting perspective, when campuses opened back up over the summer and they were able to have recruits on campus for the first time in like over a year, you heard all of these folks saying like, oh my gosh, it's so much more organized. It's so much more structured. And, then you started hearing all these stories come out about Gus Malzahn about like how bad his program was. Which is interesting because it's not like, let's don't act like Gus was a terrible coach at Auburn. So, I mean, that's kind of an interesting thing to talk about and break down if it leads to that. But I think it's just kind of a lot more of a guessing game right now ever since Harsin's been on board. And I think as he kind of establishes relationships with, whether it's beat reporters or just people throughout the community, I think we're going to kind of get more and more information as it goes on. I mean, Gus was here for a long time. I mean, 8 years. I think some Auburn fans take for granted because they're so fixated on Auburn and then, their rivals with Georgia kind of keeping their coaches for a while, whether it's Rick and now Kirby Smart seems to be there for a while. Then obviously Nick Saban's the most tenured coach in the SEC. I think Auburn fans kind of take for granted how long 8 years is to have a head coach there. So in short, I think it's kind of been a lot of a guessing game and speculation so far. Wait and see.
Listen, Zach, I enjoy your podcast a bunch, and you did a segment with Anthony Schwartz that was highly acclaimed and highly talked about in Auburn circles. So I want to go back to that for a second. During that segment, Anthony talked a little bit about what Pro Scouts' expectation was of Auburn receivers in terms of route running and what was on tape and what was not on tape. So having had the pleasure of talking to some players from the old guard under the old coach, you know, what is the sense that you got from that conversation about how well prepared kids were for the NFL under Gus?
I mean, based on the conversations you mentioned, and I appreciate the compliments there. Yeah, I mean, Flash came on and talked about his draft process, and I asked him a question. All right, what's it like talking to these guys? And when they ask about the tape that you put on film, and he said that they've got to answer a lot of questions. They've got to answer a lot of questions from NFL folks. And he said at least now they're able to kind of point to Darius Slayton because of the success he's had with the Giants and say, hey, it's possible to be an Auburn receiver and have success in the league. But, he told stories about how he's got to like justify and explain how they had passing patterns set up and they ran these, solid passing concepts in practice and then just never ran them in a game. And that's interesting. Like, that's very, very odd, especially when, the Auburn fan base was just clamoring for some sort of passing attack, not just, either put it at the line of scrimmage or throw it way downfield. Like, where's that intermediate passing game? Short said they did all of that in practice. It was just never called in the game. And so was that a Morris thing? Was that a Malzahn thing? I don't know. But it sounds like, based on the way Anthony was talking about it, is Seth Williams dealt with the same thing. Ryan Davis was my intern for a semester or so, and it sounds like, a route tree was something that really wasn't preached that much. It was just, hey, you're going to do your role and you're going to do it really, really well. And that's just kind of the way that Gus coached that.
So the most recent event, Zach, was SEC Media Days, and a lot came out from that. Harsin spoke for almost 30 minutes, took a few questions. He said a lot on the front end. What were some of the biggest takeaways that you took from Harsin speaking to the media?
We don't get Harsin a whole lot, but when he talks, man, he talks. I mean, comparing this to, his Christmas Eve presser, his first presser when he was announced head coach. I mean, he talked for a while. Different scenarios, but I think there's definitely still some similarities there. 5,100 words in his opening statement at Media Days, and then just took 3 questions. And those questions were about Arkansas State and culture, which are, I don't think we would have, really guessed that going into it. I would have thought it'd be about the quarterback competition or, recruiting against, some of these SEC blue bloods, but what stood out to me was we knew he was a culture guy. We knew he wasn't going to give us any information, but what he did do, and he did it twice on the main stage, and there's no telling where he did it, off the record or, on Radio Row or what have you, but he had no issue pooping on Gus Malzahn. I mean, he did it twice, right? He did it twice. So he did it when he was asked about the Arkansas State game, because of course he replaced Gus at Arkansas State. And then in 2013, when Arkansas State came to Auburn, there was that weird uniform drama. We can go into that, guys, if you want to. And then the other one, a guy that works for me at the Auburn Network, Lance Dahl, asked the question about culture. And he said, I don't really have any say over what the previous culture was, but I do know that people were showing up late to practice and they weren't finishing drills and things like that. He's like, I had to figure that out. I'm paraphrasing there, but that's the gist of what it was. And it's like, wow, he's gone out of his way to poke at Gus Malzahn 2 different times, in that 30-minute period. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, I think that he said a lot more than I thought he was going to say.
Yeah.
And, kudos to the reporters who asked the engaging questions that got that Bryan Harsin. But he did take some pokes at the previous regime. Now, in my opinion, I really feel like he was trying to draw a line about where this program is or was and where it's going to be under his administration. So as you've been covering this new Harsin administration, have you gotten a sense from staff? I know you talked to Bradley Larondo. We did as well, and current players that things really have changed for the better? And what does that say about what they were before?
I've gotten the chance to work with a few players just with NIL stuff, and we may talk about that later in the show. But just talking with them one-on-one about the differences, and do they like the way things are going and all of that. It sounds like it's night and day. I mean, it sounds like they're really being pushed. It sounds like they're really focusing on getting better. And, just some amazing things about, like, there's actually punishment if you show up late. Something that Owen Papo said on, several different stops at media days last week on Thursday, where it's a team goal for everyone to get to everything 10 minutes early. And if they're not, the team punishes them. I think that's great. Accountability is important because it doesn't sound like there was a bunch of accountability at Auburn over the last better part of a decade. So that's a plus. That's great. And I think when you look at it, you've got to figure out, okay, for you to get better as a team, a big part of that is all the parts of the team. Each individual player needs to get better. And I wish I could remember which player I was talking to, but they were saying how they actually have like individual goals for each player, whether it's 40 time, whether it's 3-cone, whether it's a specific lift like bench press or weight or, a certain weight at reps, squat, all that good stuff. There's actually goals for each individual player. And apparently that wasn't a thing before, which once again blows my mind. But I think it's just the focus on the individual. And you mentioned talking with Brad Larondo. I'm sure he talked about this with you guys as well, but he kept saying over and over and over again, it's like, if we're not pushing you anymore, if we're not really being hard on you to make you better, it means we don't care about you anymore. And that's just not going to happen under this administration. Larondo said that over and over and over again. And so, that's a mentality that they had at Boise State, and they're taking that mentality here. And I know that says, like, you hear that and you think, okay, well, that's obvious. Every head football coach wants their team to get better, but I don't think accountability is something that a lot of people want in today's day and age. And I think Harsin doesn't care about that. I think Harsin is all about, okay, no, I'm going to hold you accountable whether you like it or not. And in fact, if you don't like it, you're probably not going to play at Auburn anymore. So that's what I got from Larondo's conversation. That's really the only member of the staff that I've talked to. And then just talking to some of the players over the summer, that's been the biggest takeaway, is just how different it is from an accountability standpoint. And hey, we're going to make you better.
Yeah, and accountability is even something that Harsin has been preaching. I think he talked about being disciplined a lot at media days, and there's been clips from Auburn AU football on Twitter where there's a clip of him saying everything that we do matters. And so we understand that there's a new culture shift at Auburn, but one of the things that fans have gotten used to. You talked about we've been used to having a coach here for 8 years. We've been used to having impressive recruiting classes, right? And when you take into effect the dead period, the extended dead period, and changing coaching staffs, by which a good part of the staff came from the other part of the country, it kind of put Auburn behind the 8 ball. And for a fan base that's been used to seeing Auburn hovering around the top 10 throughout the year, to see where we are has caused a little bit of anxiety and panic in our fan base. What do you make of where Auburn is right now in terms of recruiting, given that so much has changed on the Plains?
I don't know. And I know that's not a good answer. And let me explain kind of where I'm coming from with that. I don't think Auburn's going to have as good of recruiting classes under Harsin as they did Malzahn. In fact, I mean, if they're in the top 15 of the next 2 seasons, I'd be a little surprised. That's just where I'm at. Hopefully they get there. But I don't think that means that Auburn can't be competitive at the highest level, because I really think the transfer portal is going to be huge for Bryan Harsin. And until they change, and I say they, I guess 247 is probably going to be the one that does this. Until we are able to rank transfers in a recruiting class, Auburn's not going to look good. But like, if Donovan Kaufman was in this past year's recruiting class, it would look better. A guy that has SEC experience, only a few games before he got hurt, but a guy that has 4 years of eligibility and has all the upside in the world. Marcus Harris from Kansas. That's a guy that people wanted. TJ Finley is a guy with a ton of eligibility left because of, the weird COVID rules. And he's a guy that would be sought after. So, I mean, these guys that they're not 4 stars, but as far as value goes, they are 4 stars. And so I think from a recruiting standpoint, if you really value and you think that's still going to be the way it is for college football, and it's really important for you to have 20 plus high school commits every year, if you think the future of college football looks like that and that's still important like it has been, then yes, I think you should be concerned. But I don't think that's what the future of college football looks like. I think you're going to get around 15 or 16 guys per class, and then you're going to just kind of roll the dice and see what comes to you and what's available in the transfer portal. And look, I think Auburn did a great job considering it was new to everybody, and they were able to just get a lot of really talented dudes, and they got a nice mix of types of transfers in the transfer portal. I'm a little surprised how heavy they went on the defensive side of the balls. Surprised we didn't see any offensive linemen there. We did eventually see a receiver. It took a while, but we eventually got one there. But I think the nice depth of guys like Donovan Kaufman, who have several years of eligibility left, to guys like Bydarius Knighton and Tony Fair, who are coming in with, a prove it year, essentially saying all right, you've got one more chance to prove it at the highest level that you can make it to an NFL team and possibly be drafted. And those are 2 guys that I'm extremely high on over the course of all of this. So should fans panic about recruiting? The recruiting classes, I don't think are going to get any better. I really don't. I think they're going to stay around 20, 25, 30. But I think the transfer portal market is going to really, really benefit teams like Auburn.
Listen, Zach, I'll give you a little Mike G-ism here. Coaches who can develop don't worry about stars. And coaches who worry about stars probably can't develop because they need the stars. Are you getting a sense that Harsin is a guy who can develop in your conversation with players? I think that's one of the biggest knocks on our last coach was he got all the stars in the world, but those players were not well prepared for the next level. And a lot of them never saw their athletic potential, the peak of their athletic potential at Auburn. Is that something that you're getting a sense that we're going to start to see at Auburn kind of moving forward?
So let me preface this answer with, I'm not as down on Malzahn's inability to develop players as most people are. Okay. I think, there's no thinking about it. He put more guys in the league than any coach in Auburn history. Now, was that because they were already talented when he got them? Maybe. I think guys got better under him. I think when you talk about quarterback, it's a little different story. I still think there's examples, though, that kind of prove that guys did improve under him. But regardless, I think Harsin will make guys better. And I think when you look at a lot of what a lot of the things that the NFL looks at throughout this, that transition from college to pro is frame and natural athleticism and just power. And then when they sit down with them, it's do you understand the game? Do you have enough where we can mold you into something special? And I think it was Owen Papo. He joined On the Line. It's one of our shows on ESPN 106.7. Noah Gardner, Lance Dahl hosted. They got an interview with Owen on Thursday. And they asked him about the offseason conditioning. And he talked about how, under Coach Russell, Malzahn's strength and conditioning coach, it was very much about flexibility and speed. And now it's all more about getting more power and putting more weight on the bar while still focusing on speed and, agility and flexibility and all that. But there's a lot more focus on gaining size and gaining strength and gaining power. And that's what they test you for in the combine. Sure, it's fun to watch the 40 times, but most scouts don't care about 40 times because you can see that on tape. You can see that on film. It's a different type of speed. But with offensive linemen, they want you to be bigger and stronger and, have, the ability to have these short bursts of explosions. And I don't know if we've consistently done that over the past 8 seasons. So are guys going to get better under Harsin? I think so. I definitely think so, just because I think their frames are going to be more developed. and they're going to be bigger and stronger. And that's obviously a big part of it. So I think so. I definitely think so.
Zach, let's talk about a key position group on the offensive side of the ball that you've kind of already alluded to. Auburn picked up TJ Finley out of the transfer portal. He was one of the key pickups on the offensive side of the ball, and there's been much speculation over what his signing meant, right? And TJ Finley, confident guy, he's as confident as Bo demonstrated last week at Media Days. He feels like he has a shot to win this job. And so this is something that we've talked about on our shows in terms of we're actually seeing potentially what could be an actual quarterback competition in the fall that may even extend into the season, depending on how the first few games go in September. What are your thoughts about this signing of TJ Finley, and does Auburn really have a true QB competition on its hands and hopefully some depth with TJ Finley coming on board?
The potential sting of Finley coming on board to push Bo Nix, I think it lost some of its luster when Bo Nix was selected to represent Auburn at Media Days, because I don't know how you don't start him now. He started 2 seasons, then you take him to Media Days after you knew who he was. And so if I'm Finley, I'm like, what in the world's going on? And Harsin was asked about that. Harsin was asked about Finley specifically and the quarterback position specifically when he was kind of off to the side with some of the local media. And he said, look, I'm not just going to give you a job because you transferred in. You still have to earn it. And he talked about how if you transfer in and we ask you to, if we acquire you from the transfer portal, it's assumed that you have a chance to compete for the starting job. That was his answer. I don't think I buy it, guys. I really don't. I do think Finley will push Bo. I think Finley will definitely be a really good backup, but I think that's it. And it's a really non-sexy thing to talk about. But I think the acquisition and the addition of TJ Finley to this roster, I think it's just the backup quarterback position got better for the Tigers. And maybe there's going to be a really, really fascinating conversation about the quarterback position. And I think 2 seasons, maybe Bo goes pro after this year. I don't think so. I think he's got 2 years left at Auburn, but it's going to be a really interesting battle between Finley and Davis and Garner 2 seasons from now. I think that's all it is.
Okay, Zach, so I want to stay right here on this quarterback competition because you said something that I think is interesting in that, this is essentially just a depth move for Harsin bringing in Finley, despite what he's saying about if you transfer in, it's assumed that you have a chance to win the starting job.
Yeah.
But for most fans, I don't think that it was ever a doubt that Bo was going to start the season because you can't bring a quarterback in and he win a job in a summer after the incumbent just went through a whole spring in a new system. But what is your feeling in terms of the leash that Bo will be on with Finley here in the event that things aren't going so hot, or we're not moving the ball that we should be, or we're stalling in the red zone, or we're just not getting quarterback production? What do you think the leash is going to be like for Bo with Finley here?
It's definitely shorter. And I think that's just part of having a better backup quarterback. So I think that's definitely an angle of it. Also, I think it's going to be interesting to see how the coaching staff, one, uses that. And what I mean by that is, like, in the past, last year I had no faith that the offensive scheme would be quarterback friendly to, any kind of, whatever its personnel was. I think Harsin and Bobo this year are going to be able to craft game plans specific to, what's going to help Bo Nix, what's going to help Tank Bigsby, what's going to help this offensive line, and what's going to help these wide receivers. I don't know if that was really done in the past. So while the leash will be shorter for Bo Nix, I don't think it's ever going to get tight by any means, because I think there's 2 play callers on this offense that are going to be able to feel the game and kind of help set Bo Nix up for success and just really help all of the offensive players be set up more for success. And this may be me sunshine pumping, but I really think I really think the offensive line is going to benefit from that. I really think the wide receivers are going to benefit from that, and I really think the running backs are going to benefit from that. So therefore, the quarterback's going to help. So I really just think the scheme's going to help everybody out.
All right, Zach. Let's talk about something else that is taking place in the offseason, and that's NIL.
All
Name,
right.
image, and likeness. It seems like in the 9th, 12th, 13th, 14th hour, the NCAA finally kicking and screaming decided that, yes, players are going to be able to profit off of their name, image, and likeness in the form of endorsement deals, profit off of social media, everything involving, with the exception of the school actually handing them a paycheck, right? Locked on Auburn podcast has actually reached out to some Auburn players. One of them being Brandon Council,
Right.
Sean Shivers, and you mentioned a few other guys as well. Talk to us about, just first off, how your thoughts about NIL. Is it good for college football and for college athletes, and how Locked on Auburn has gotten involved in NIL?
Yeah. The other two guys, two walk-on quarterbacks, Sawyer Pate and Trey Lindsay, wanted to give some love to some of the walk-on guys, because I think it's going to be players like that really benefit from all of this. As far as what Locked On's got out of it, it was just I wanted them to do some social media posts for us. And so, I kind of told them specifically what I was thinking in regards to an image that I wanted them to tweet or post on Instagram. And I sent them the text, and they put it in the post, and they sent it out on, the days that we talked about them doing that. So that's been that. As far as what it's looked like in regards to the players, I think it's great. I think it's fantastic. And, all of what's the biggest negative that you guys hear? It's their, folks are not going to get paid the same, and folks are going to be too focused on, their NIL deals and, less focused on practice and all of that. And I asked some of the players that I've worked with about that. It's like, is there any talk about that? Like you sit next to Bo Nix all the time. Is there any talk about that? How much was the Milo's deal? And he's like, no, absolutely not. It doesn't come up. And I think it's just kind of an assumed thing that the starting quarterback is going to get more NIL money than other players on the team. I mean, you see it in the NFL. Everybody in the NFL doesn't get paid the same. Go to any office.
Right.
Any office in America. Odds are not everybody's going to get paid the same. Now, you may not know, that so-and-so down the hall is getting paid more than you, but you don't really know that here either because you're focused on your own NIL stuff. So I think it's great. I think it's great for the sport. The kids seem to be having a lot of fun with it. They seem to really be benefiting from it. And also, local businesses are going to benefit from this. And there's been several folks that, local clients that I work with on Locked on Auburn or at the Auburn Network, that kind of asked me for advice on, what player do you think I should reach out to for this or kind of thing. And I'm like, if you're a delivery service and you haven't reached out to Sean Shivers yet, I don't know what you're doing. You can just be like, hey, these guys are as fast as me kind of thing. There's just so many different things you could do with it. So I think it's fantastic. I think it's great. What I do think is interesting from an Auburn perspective is it sounds like Auburn is making its players jump through way more hoops than other schools are. And I think that's interesting. Auburn, the players at Auburn, they have, it's called an influencer app. And it's like, what type of endorsement is it? And so you can do social media or autograph signing or, something like that. And then it's got the price and the date. And then there's a place where you can attach a file. And so, I send them a Word document. It's kind of like an informal contract kind of thing. And they send that off to compliance. The compliance okays it and they get back with you. Other schools, it's just, all right, go have fun. And the school's not really getting involved at all. It seems like, based on the folks that I've talked to, whether it's folks at Auburn or folks that run these new NIL marketing firms, it seems like Auburn's one of the more strict ones that they're seeing. At South Carolina, it seems like at Alabama, it's just wide open. Just go get yours. I do think they have to report it but I don't think there's any questions asked about it. It's just like, okay, cool, thanks. And so I think that's an interesting thing, because from a recruiting standpoint, that's eventually going to be a thing. And it may be this class. That's going to be a thing that matters. That's going to be a thing that it's like, okay, I want to be able to market myself and make money off of my name, image, and likeness as easy as possible. And Auburn's not that place. So I think that's interesting to think about.
You kind of delved into the next direction I wanted to go, Zach, when talking about how the university is handling all this. So I want to double back a little bit. Have you received any specific communication from the university about what is allowed, what isn't allowed? Are there any non-disclosures about what they can talk about? Practice things, game plans. Have you been told or given guidelines about etiquette when it comes to these deals with players?
So a lot of folks, and there's a bunch of different places you can go. Iron Source is a big one. There's a lot of Auburn players there, and you can fill out like what exactly you want from them, whether it's a social media post or an interview or something like that. Auburn seems to not be okay with interviews. That seems to be a thing. Everything else seems to be fair game, and we see Bo Nix doing the camp with his dad. We've seen, I think we're going to see some autograph signings once the season starts. And we see a ton of social media posts all over the place, whether it's them putting on their story. That's a different rate than just putting something on as an Instagram post or a tweet based on how many followers you have. But Auburn's, I haven't heard anything back from Auburn. It's all been the players relaying the communication back and forth. But as far as like what they're able to do, I think Auburn seems to be cool with everything but interviews.
Are you seeing that? And I guess you said a lot of schools are wide open. Are other schools allowing players to do interviews that you're aware of, or is that an Auburn thing?
I think it's an Auburn thing. It's a school by school thing. I mentioned Iron Source. I've got their app. I'm pretty sure it's Iron Source. You can pull it up and like get an you can pay for an interview with Big Cat Bryant. Like you can just pay for it, and then he'll call you and you set up a time and it just happens. If you wanted to go down to UCF and get him or something like that. Most schools have that, but it doesn't seem to be an option for Auburn players.
Okay. So Zach, you mentioned that Auburn seems to be cool with everything but interviews, but are you getting a sense that is because the one thing that a player can actually do to get in trouble with NIL is say something that their coach doesn't want them to say, right? I mean, because we're talking about kids who may not be skilled at being able to give media interviews, and maybe the university's trying to keep them out of trouble in that area.
Yeah, maybe so. And, Auburn's always been one of the programs that's more tight-lipped, and we didn't think it could get any more tight-lipped under Gus, but I think we found a way. And that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing at all. I think Bryan Harsin has a plan in place, and I think part of that has to do with the success he's seen in Boise. And it's like, no, we're going to do this my way, and his way has worked everywhere he's been. So I don't think it's a bad thing, but it is interesting, and it is different than a lot of the schools throughout college football or college athletics. But yeah, you would think, and everybody's different, but you would think the folks that set up an interview would have, the media professional would have the wherewithal and respect for the game or respect for the kid to not ask him a question like that. You would think that, but I get why they're protecting the kid. Auburn's doing what it thinks is best, and there's nothing wrong with that. And, maybe is that going to hurt them in recruiting, that angle of their NIL? Probably not. I mean, how many kids really want to do an interview with us anyway? You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think Auburn's doing what they think is best, and I think that's okay.
Harsin has a plan in place. He has a system, tried and true. It's been at Boise since late 90s, right? And Harsin is bringing that to Auburn, which has been a culture shock for the Auburn football players, those around the administration. Do you foresee Harsin making any adjustments in terms of his approach Of course, there's been speculation about Big Cat Weekend, which will have already taken place. And there's questions about, okay, was that always planned, or is this Harsin and the coaching staff adjusting to the new landscape, the recruiting landscape? Because this has to be a bit of a culture shock for him as well, because this is the big stage. This is big time. So do you foresee Harsin and the staff, I don't know if you're talking to players or talk to people close to the program, where Harsin has had to kind of adjust his approach?
I don't think that's who Harsin is. I think Harsin has his plan. I think it's like I said, it's worked everywhere that he's been. And I think the only thing that's really not transferable from Boise to Auburn is recruiting. And, you mentioned Big Cat Weekend, and we'll see how that goes. Hopefully it goes well for Harsin and the Tigers. We'll have to see. But I think keeping things shut down and keeping things super focused, he loves the 1-0 mentality. All those things work. And, we hear similar things from coaches similar to Harsin at every level of football, ranging from high school to the NFL. So, I mean, those traits in a head coach work. It's the practical side of recruiting that I think is the only thing that he may have to adjust what he's doing.
Well, Zach, we've talked about a lot. We've talked about recruiting. We've talked about NIL. We've talked about Gus. To put a bow on all this, you've interviewed former players. You've talked to current staff. What does a successful season look like for Bryan Harsin in year one? Is it wins and losses? What does it look like?
I think 8-4 is kind of your mark. Anything north of that, you're ecstatic about. Anything less than that, I think you're like, okay, all right, we'll see where it goes. Then it may kind of go into, how did you look against Georgia? How did you look against Alabama? Because I think Auburn's going to lose both of those games. But how does it look when that first road game at Penn State? Then you go to LSU a few weeks later. But also, Auburn was voted to finish 5th in the West by SEC media last week. And once again, maybe we're too close to the program and we're seeing all the good, but that just seems really low to me. I think they're better than Ole Miss. I think they're better than LSU. And I'm just not drinking the A&M Kool-Aid. I never have. And, they almost made it last year, but last year was a weird year for college football. I mean, the drop off from number 3 to number 4 last year was dramatic, and we saw that in the college football playoff. So I think 8-4 is your goal, and I think that's very realistic. There's 5 toss-up games, in my opinion: Penn State, LSU, Georgia, A&M, and Alabama. And if you go 1-4 or 2-3 in those games, and you take care of business against teams that you should beat, if you want to put Ole Miss in there, say there's 6 and you can go 3-3 in those 6 games, all of a sudden it's like, okay, that's not a bad season. That's not a bad season at all. So yeah, that's my stance on it.
Well, look, Zach, we really appreciate you joining us today to talk some Auburn football and Bryan Harsin and SEC Media Days and all of it. Your perspective is always appreciated, and we love Locked on Auburn here at the War Rapport. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. And like I said, you guys are killing it. I'm an insider with you guys. If folks watching this after it comes out and aren't insiders, these guys are the truth, man. It's worth every penny. Support these guys.
Well, as always, we are the War Rapport. If you want more content like this, please hit like and subscribe. We are the War Rapport on Twitter and Instagram, TW Rapport on TikTok. Gentlemen, we're signing off. And as always, War Eagle.
War Eagle.